social distancing, you say? The future is watching. Welcome to OpCode Virtual Summit.
Hi, Patrick. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi,
Okay,
Matt. How's it?
perfect.
Aloha.
Hello. Thanks again for joining us for your presentation. And you're live now, so you can go ahead.
Great. First, I want to thank Matt for organizing this conference, making it freely available and available online. It's really, really cool. Also, thanks for the invite to talk about some of the Zoom vulnerabilities and issues that I discovered. So what we're going to talk about today are some flaws in the macOS client. I published a blog post that has a lot of technical details, good diagrams and overviews. So we're going to kind of walk through that first. And as that will allow me to explain exactly how I found the bugs and how to weaponize and exploit them. We're then going to switch and do a few demos to kind of illustrate the impact of the bugs and also how a attacker or piece of malware would go about exploiting these vulnerabilities. So I want to start by noting these bugs were in the, at the time, latest version of the macOS client. Both bugs were local bugs. Also, I think that's important to note because this would mean that an adversary or a piece of malware would need initial code execution on an infected system. But we'll see, though, that these bugs then give such an attacker or piece of malware the ability to either escalate their privileges to root or surreptitiously access the mic and the webcam by piggybacking off Zoom's access. I also want to note that Zoom has released a patch for both of these bugs. They actually patched them within a day, so kudos to Zoom. So if you're using Zoom and are concerned about the security of the product, definitely download and run the latest version because there's lots of good security goodness and patches in that latest version. So start with a bit of background talking about Zoom, and I think also this will shed light on kind of the platform as the whole, and also kind of why I got inspired to look at the platform. So as I'm sure we're all aware, Zoom has become incredibly popular over the last few weeks due to the unfortunate pandemic that's impacting people all over the world. It's very common now for people to use Zoom, both for personal reasons, for example, to talk to their friends and relatives, but businesses we're seeing also are now leveraging Zoom. There was a recent article a few weeks ago showing that the UK government was actually using Zoom for government communications. So, obviously a very, very interesting target. And we take a step back and look at Zoom's track record. We can see that its privacy and security track record really wasn't that stellar. So let's briefly talk about some of the previous bugs before we dive into the ones that I discovered. So first, last summer, we had an issue where a researcher named Jonathan found a really nice remote vulnerability in Zoom. In short, a malicious website could coerce a user's system to turn on the webcam. So this obviously both a security and privacy concern. You don't want remote websites being able to turn on the webcam. And the flaw was because Zoom had installed. So the user had Zoom installed and somehow visited a malicious website. The website could turn on the user's camera and spy on them, obviously. Less than ideal. Interesting fact about this vulnerability is that Apple actually pushed out an update via their malware removal tool, MRT, as a way to actually remove this vulnerable Zoom component from systems around the world. So interesting to see Apple both taking this action without user consent and also using their malware removal tool to do that. So it was good probably from a security point of view because it uninstalled this insecure Zoom component that could be left running even if the user uninstalled Zoom. But again, I think it's some insight into Apple's capability and power and shows that at any time they can remove any program from your computer without your consent. Moving on, most recently we had an issue in the iOS application where application Zoom specifically would send Facebook data to Facebook even if you didn't have a Facebook account. From really not a lot of security implications here, but more of a privacy issue. Zoom, as we note, was quick to patch this and basically said, hey, sorry, we're using this third-party SDK, this framework. We weren't aware that it was basically tracking and sending this information. So kudos to them for fixing this, but a little worrisome that they're compiling third-party frameworks into their code and not auditing and looking what these frameworks are doing. So these issues, these bugs, I think were kind of illustrative of the approach that Zoom had towards security and privacy, which was very lax, right? It really wasn't a priority. So I decided to kind of dig in and look at the Mac client, especially after one of my friends, Felix, another fellow security researcher, noticed that the installer did some less than, I would say, up and up action. So for example, it kind of uses some tricks on Mac OS to install itself with you actually not having to hit the install button. So I dove in and started looking at the Zoom installer. It's distributed as a PKG file. We'll show this in the demo, but you can use a utility such as Suspicious Package. It's a free online application that allows you to look at the contents of PKG files without having to extract all the files or run the PKG file. So if we open this package, zoom.pkg, in the Suspicious Package analysis application, we can see there's a variety of scripts that will get run when the user kicks off the installer. The pre-install script, this is a default script that any PKG can add, and it will have commands that will be executed pre-install. That's why it's called pre-install. So we can see Zoom does a variety of things. And basically, if we scroll down, or actually, I can show you this now. I think it's around, and this is a little hard to see, so I'll cut and paste this into a window. Just click on the text edit window. Run with root. We can see that this application is going to execute something called Zoom authentication tool run with root. And this is in order to install the application because perhaps the user doesn't have the access or the ability to write things directly to the application directly. So what Zoom is basically saying is, hey, we need to elevate our privileges so that we can complete the install. This is fairly common, right? The majority of installers oftentimes need to elevate their privileges to perform certain privilege actions. But I've looked at a lot of installers, and over the past few years, have found it's difficult to do this in a secure manner. So once Felix kind of noted that Zoom's installer was, kind of questionable, and maybe not written as well as it could, I wanted to dive in and see if I could uncover any flaws. So what we can do is we can look at this Zoom authentication tool, because this is what gets executed to run with root. We don't know what that run with root is yet, but we'll see in a minute. It's a script that gets run with root. We can hop over into a disassembler. And I apologize, this might be a little hard to see. Unfortunately, Hopper doesn't allow me to make this bigger. But again, I'll copy and paste this into the text edit window. Make this a little smaller. And basically, there's a method called execute command. This is what that utility is going to execute. When we scroll down, really none of this matters except for the call to authorize execute with privileges. This is a well-known Apple API that an installer or an application can call in order to perform a authorized action. If you're familiar with the authentication prompt on your system, when you run an installer, it's possible that this API is responsible for that. So we hop back to the blog, talk a little bit about this API, because it's unfortunately everywhere, and we'll see that it's a deprecated API, which can lead to problematic scenarios. So here's kind of a diagrammatic overview of the API. We can see, for example, it describes the problem, and the problem is basically, in a nutshell, that it performs no validation on what it's about to execute. So a legitimate application can call this API and say, hey, please execute this script or this command for me with elevated privileges because I need to complete an install. The authentication will take care of the pop-up and handling everything. And behind the scenes, we can see what it's going to do. It's going to basically call into this binary called security auth trampoline. This is a set UID binary that ships with macOS. And then once this application or this binary has successfully authenticated, meaning shown the pop-up and the user has put in their correct or an admin credentials, it will execute whatever the API was called with as root. But again, there's no verification. This is problematic because it means if a local adversary or piece of malware is on the system, if what is about to be executed is not adequately protected, meaning it's not owned by root, so it can be edited perhaps by that local unprivileged adversary or piece of malware, this API will naively and blindly execute it with root privileges. So obviously an attacker can subvert what is about to be executed, potentially, and then gain privileges as soon as that is executed with root privileges. So we see Zoom is using this API. So the question is zooming this securely? So if we run the Zoom package, we can see the authentication pop-up. This is fairly standard. And if the user puts in their credentials, it's going to execute something behind the scenes. So we need to figure out what it's executing and if whatever it's executing, a local unprivileged attacker can modify in the background to then add code or command to get that executed as root, kind of during the install process. So the easiest way we can do this, and we'll do this in the demo as well, we run a process monitor and we look for the execution of the security auth trampoline process. Recall, this is the actual Apple system binary that handles the authentication request and ultimately executes with root privileges, because it's owned by root, set UID, whatever the installer or application has specified. So in our process monitor, we can see that the command that's passed with is run with root. And this is not surprising, right? This is what we saw in the Zoom installer package. This is what it was executing. So this all lines up. So then the question then becomes, what is this run with root command, script, binary, and can we modify it? So if we go back or look closer at the install process, we can see that when the PKG is run, this run with root file is copied to a installer directory by the installer. And good news for us as a hacker or unauthorized piece of malware, this install directory is owned with user permissions. So this means that the run with root bash script that is dropped by the installer and that will be run with root is not protected. It is editable by anybody on the system, even a user without any special permissions. So what we can basically do, and here's a diagrammatic overview, is we can basically watch and wait for the Zoom installer or updater to be run. We can then detect when that run with root file has been created. And since it's created with just normal writable permissions by anyone, right? Just sitting in a temp directory, anyone can hop in and modify it. We can go in and then surreptitiously add some code or some commands. And then when that gets executed during the install process, whatever we've added to that to that script will be executed. Because again, the authenticate execute with privileges API does not validate what it's executing. So that's kind of the issue. That's kind of the flaw. So I'm going to are on our sides. Let's see if we have this. Okay. See how the resolution is on this VM. Give me one sec. Okay, I'm gonna log in. My super secret password for the VM. Make this a little bigger. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run a process monitor. And this is going to allow us to see and confirm what Zoom is running. So make this a touch bigger. Okay, so the process monitor is running. We're now going to run the Zoom installer. Really tiny, I apologize. Basically though, we're gonna click continue. Eventually, there's going to be an authentication prompt right here. This is Zoom asking for credentials, saying, hey, I need to your credentials in order to complete the install. So we can go ahead here and authenticate, and then Zoom is happily installed. If we kill the process monitor and we look for this trampoline process, it's a little bigger here. We can see that, as we talked about, and I showed in the blog, this security auth trampoline process was exec to execute the run with root command. So this is just confirming, yes, in the background, Zoom is invoking this insecure API and executing this run with root. We hop over to the install directory, com.apple.install this, do an ls-lart. We can see that there is that run with root script that was dropped by the installer. And more importantly, the permissions on this file are test/system. And that's who I am running as, just the default user. This is actually a standard user with no admin privileges. So again, this confirms that Zoom is going to execute this file with root privileges. We can actually confirm that if we hop back to the process monitor. We can see that binsh bash is running with UUID 0, it's running as root, and it's executing the run with root. So security auth trampoline executes that. So what we're going to now do is we're going to show how we can exploit that. We're going to add some commands to that run with root, and then during the install process, we will hopefully pop a root shell. So let me just go ahead and delete this install directory. And let's kill Zoom. Okay, we don't need this process monitor. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pop a root shell out of temp. So I just want to show you that ls, there's nothing in the temp directory, standard stuff. We'll show there's a file that gets dropped here. So what we're gonna do is run the Zoom installer again. We're gonna do this manually. Obviously, we could do this programmatically. We're gonna go through, hit continue. It's gonna start doing its thing. Ask for its authentication credentials. What we're going to do now is we're going to take some commands to pop a root shell. We're going to cd into the installer directory. We're going to see that the run with root command is there. We're running as a normal root user, no privs, but we can edit this file. So we're going to use vim. And you can see I am basically just copying a shell to the temp directory, setting it to be owned by root, setting the set UID bid, and then executing it. So we're going to save this. Some impressive Vim skills. It's really all I know how to do. Come back. We're going to authenticate. Zoom's going to install. And it's going to execute that script that we've added those malicious commands to. And Zoom, go away. Demo gods are stoked. You can see, who am I? We now have a root shell. If we look at the temp directory, we can see KSH is there, LART, KSH, and we can see that it's owned by root, and it has the set UID. So now we have a root shell that we can pop. Again, the attack scenario would be an unprivileged attacker or a local piece of malware that's perhaps running without root privileges. What it's going to do is going to wait until Zoom is run or the installer is executed, and then can elevate its privileges to root using this attack. So that's kind of the first issue, kind of neat logic flaw in the Zoom installer that allows malicious code to elevate its privileges to root. Now, the next local flaw that affects macOS, let me just have some water. Boils down to the fact that Zoom was compiled with an interesting, let's say, exception that would allow malicious code to be injected into its trusted processing space. And this was problematic because Zoom is likely going to have access to the mic and the webcam. So in recent versions of macOS, imagine malware gets onto your system, and perhaps it wants to spy on you, turn on the mic, turn on the webcam, you know, capture room audio, see you walking around in your awesome Objective by the Sea t-shirt. And so it tries to access the mic or the webcam. Apple has added a great security feature on Catalina, and maybe even macOS version before, that basically shows, will block that access until the user has explicitly approved this. And this was done to protect against this exact kind of attack. So for example, when the user runs Zoom, this is legit Zoom, nothing suspicious at this point. When Zoom goes to access the mic and the webcam, macOS is going to block that, and then the user is going to hack to approve it. Now, the majority of users that use Zoom are going to either give it access to the mic or the webcam. Otherwise, Zoom is essentially useless. So what I thought is, can I find a way to piggyback off Zoom's ability in order to access the mic and the camera via Zoom's permissions? And as we'll see, the answer was yes. So popping down here, the first thing we can do is we can check that Zoom is validly signed and it's compiled with something called the hardened runtime. So initially, this appears problematic for us as hackers because the hardened runtime basically says don't allow code to be injected into whatever application is compiled with that. This is something I talked about back at Zero Nights in 2016. At the time, Apple was not using hardened runtime. And so I said, hey, this would be a good idea. Something they were already doing on iOS. They should port this to macOS. Not sure they were there and listening, but regardless, recent versions of macOS, you can compile applications with this hardened runtime. And you can determine that via the code sign utility. Specifically, you want to look for this right here, flags equal OX 10,000. This is basically saying this application was compiled with the hardened runtime, meaning local code malware attackers, in theory, should not be able to inject malicious code into this application. So it's a self-defense mechanism that applications can opt into at compile. So looks like Zoom did this. So far, so good. However, Zoom's security and privacy record has left a lot to be desired. So I said, I'm going to just keep looking a little more because they've made a lot of missteps. And so maybe there's more. So the next thing I did is I dumped Zoom's entitlements. Now, if you're not familiar with entitlements on macOS, it's a way to convey additional information to the operating system about what capabilities you want. So here, for example, we can see that Zoom has the entitlement to access the camera and the mic. And these are needed. macOS will still pop up and request the user, but you have to have these entitlements in order to even attempt to access the mic and the webcam. So this makes sense, right? Again, entitlements, abilities that you want to convey to macOS. However, I scrolled down a little further and I saw this very interesting entitlement, com.apple security CS, disable library validation. Apple documents this and it says it's a Boolean value that indicates whether the application may load arbitrary plugins or frameworks without code signing. Now, again, I'm always thinking things from kind of this offensive point of view. And I said, okay, well, if Zoom has this exception to allow unsigned dynamic libraries, perhaps I can get Zoom to load my own unsigned dynamic library, which normally should not be allowed because of the hardened runtime, but because they have this exception, it might be possible. And then once my dynamic library is running in the process context of Zoom, in theory, I should inherit all of Zoom's permission, including access to the mic and the webcam. So that was kind of the idea, and we'll walk through exactly how we achieve that. So we first need to figure out a way to get code executing in Zoom's context process. To add an additional dynamic library, because macOS will validate the code signature, and if that is changed, it won't, for example, continue to give it access to the mic or the webcam. This is obviously smart. Otherwise, you could just generically subvert any application that the user had given access to the mic or the webcam. However, I thought I might be able to use an interesting dilib injection technique that's called dilib proxying. And I have a diagram right here. The idea is you simply replace a legitimate dynamic library that the application has a dependency on with your own, and then your own malicious library, you proxy any commands, for example, to functions or symbols, to the original dilib. And I have another diagram here, sorry for the scroll. But when everything is said and done, this is the idea. So we'll replace a legitimate dynamic library with our own. We'll add some compiler directives to redirect any requests for objects and functions to the original dylib that we've renamed, and then everything will seamlessly work with no problems because the executable will naively load this. So what we can do is we first need to find a dynamic library that Zoom depends on that we can rename. Now, this is important because if it was only linked against system libraries, we can't modify those because those are protected with SIP. Can't even rename them. Luckily, though, we can see that Zoom exists, or rather depends on this curl64 framework. And we can determine that by running the otool command with the -l flag, which shows you all the dynamic libraries an application is dependent on. So, wondering where is this curl64? Because what it is, it's prepended with this @r path. So to figure out what this @r path is, it basically stands for runtime path. We can again run otool with the lowercase l, looking again at the Zoom application, and we find this load command, this lcr path, and this describes what the r path, the runtime path, will be. And we can see it's going to be the executable path / frameworks. So at runtime, this will get resolved to be the applications zoom.app contents macOS / frameworks, which means it'll be in the application bundle content / frameworks. And we can confirm that if we look at Zoom's application bundle, we can see, yes, indeed, there is this framework and all these that Zoom will link. And we can actually do that here. I'll just show you again. If we come to applications, do show package contents, we see, yes, there's the framework directory and there's that curl framework. Awesome. So this means we have a directory with dynamic libraries and frameworks that Zoom is going to run that we can modify, right? It's not SIP protected, it's not owned by root, et cetera, et cetera. So what we can do is now we can drop a dynamic library in there, proxy one of the legitimate ones there, and hopefully it will get loaded. I gave a talk about this, so if you want to read more about the run paths and executable paths, check out the blog. So I targeted the libSSL dylib. It's a standalone binary, just easier to modify than a full framework or a bundle. And as I mentioned, the first thing is we need to rename this dylib so that we can plant our own to get that loaded. So what we do is we simply rename it _ libSSL 1.0. We could rename it anything. I just chose that. And then if we go and re-execute Zoom, we can see that the application immediately crashes. And this is actually a good thing because this shows it's trying to load the libSSL dynamic library and it can't find it anymore. And this is shown in the image where it says the reason for crash is image not found. And it references the libSSL library that we've just renamed. So in theory, if we put our own dynamic library there and call it libSSL 1.1.0, Zoom should run that. So we pop into Xcode, we create a simple dylib, it's unsigned, we add a constructor, we save it to the framework directory as libSSL, and then we rerun Zoom. The good thing is our Zoom dylib will now get loaded, but unfortunately the application will immediately exit shortly thereafter. This is unsurprising because we've basically just taken a legitimate SSL library that likely had a bunch of required SSL capabilities, functions, methods, et cetera, and just replaced it with a vanilla, bare, skeleton-based dylib. So Zoom, tries to call into it. There's no functions found, and so it gracefully handles that and exits. So now we need to go ahead and we need to implement the proxying. So anytime Zoom requests or needs SSL capabilities and calls into what is now our library, we proxy it and forward that on to the original library so that legitimate functionality is maintained. So we don't break anything. So it turns out this is pretty easy to do. It's a very kind of neat trick. You can do it all with linker directives, so you don't have to rewrite any forwarding code. You basically specify a -x linker flag, and then a -re-export library flag, and then the path to the library that you have reproxied. Now there's one more trick, there's one more thing you have to do. This creates a dylib that's almost ready for proxying, but unfortunately some paths and names are going to be wrong. So you then execute the install name tool, and we'll show this in the demo in a second. And we basically change the path so that it points to the original dynamic library that we've renamed. Because again, our goal is so that when the Zoom executable calls into the SSL library, it gets the original SSL library's functionality, right? We're just using the SSL to get ourselves loaded. We don't want to actually implement any SSL functionality. So once we run the install name tool command, we can look at our malicious library. This libSSL is not the original one. It's our malicious dynamic library. We can see that the loader, the linker, the compiler has created this lc reexport dilib load command. And this is what tells the runtime, hey, if you have a request for the libSSL library, I don't know how to answer it, but I know who does, so please follow that. And this is the path to the dynamic library, the original one that contains the actual SSL functionality. So that's all you have to do. And once you compile and plant that dynamic library, we rerun Zoom and we can see, yes, indeed, Zoom has loaded our dynamic library into its process space. And since we are now running within the process context of Zoom, assuming Zoom has been given access to the mic and the webcam, this malicious code can directly access the mic and webcam as well. macOS will see that request. However, it sees that it's coming from Zoom. Zoom's digital signature, its binary on disk, has not been tampered with. And so the request is allowed. So first and foremost, this means we can inject into legitimate Zoom meetings and record both the room capture audio and the webcam. There won't be any alerts. Better yet, what we can do is we can actually execute Zoom in the background invisibly at arbitrary times and leverage its access to turn on the mic or the camera whenever we want. So we don't actually have to wait until Zoom is running via the user to do this. We can execute this in the background. So the attack scenario would be malware gets on a system, wants to spy on the user via the mic and the webcam. You can imagine UK government is using Zoom. Zoom's running on their systems. Malware, once it gains access, can just run Zoom in the background and then turn on the mic and listen to whatever is being said in the UK government. You know, hear them all complaining about what a stupid idea Brexit is, and can capture that without any indications, right? No pop-ups from macOS. So that's kind of an interesting attack scenario that I could see attackers or malware perhaps leveraging in the future. So to test this in my malicious dynamic library, when I named libSSL, I added some code to just capture some audio and mic off the webcam. Just 5 seconds of doing that. Standard mic webcam access. Compiled this in. If I ran this as a standalone, macOS would block this and show an alert to the user. But since the dynamic library is running within the Zoom process space, I was able to run, no alerts, captured a picture of my lovely dog. She's actually the brains behind all of this. So let me just pop over and show some of the code and examples for that second attack. Unfortunately, I was going to do a live demo, but we're using Zoom for this. And so to do this, I would have had to, restart Zoom and then kill this session. But it's kind of funny because I'm actually proxying this. I ran this attack right before I joined the Zoom call to present this to you all. And so this instance of Zoom actually has an instance of my malicious dynamic library running and is doing all the proxying. So I actually never tested it fully. I mean, I ran the app and I was like, hey, yeah, nothing crashes. But this was kind of an end-to-end, the first end-to-end tests of the proxying. And then, so far appears so good. So this is the dynamic library. This is the constructor. Constructor will be automatically invoked anytime by a piece of malware in the background in this hidden kind of version. This code inside the dynamic library will get loaded. So we just print out a message and then we instantiate a video snap object. This is just some standard code I wrote to capture video and audio off the webcam. So if we look at the compiler directives, the linkers, we can see here we have the xlinker and the /reexport library command that I specified earlier. And then once we copy this into Zoom's application bundle, this dynamic library will get automatically loaded. And if we go over to console here, we can see that Zoom did load this dynamic library, and the print statement that we saw was displayed to the screen, confirming that it was loaded. I think if I come over here, no, this is another window. And then once it's loaded by Zoom, obviously, as we talked about, it can access the mic and the webcam. And of course, do anything else that Zoom does, right? It's running in the address context of Zoom, so it has access to anything that Zoom has. And just to reiterate, the way this was all possible was because of this disable library validation key that Zoom, for some unknown reason, added to their application. It's basically an exception to the hardened runtime that tells Apple, yes, I want to opt into the hardened runtime, but I'm okay letting any third-party code running in my address space. So if you want to look for other vulnerable applications, either look for applications that are not compiled with the hardened runtime or have this exception in entitlement. And then this means you can load arbitrary dilibs into their process space. And if that application does something interesting or has some access that you want, for example, access to the mic, the webcam, keychain, user photos, access to the network, et cetera, you gain access. So this is actually a very powerful technique that goes way beyond Zoom, because first and foremost, it's kind of a great way to get persistence, right? Say you can do this to some browser. Anytime the user starts the browser, your dynamic code will get run as well. So if you're a backdoor or an implant, this is a very stealthy way to gain access and persistence, right? You're not going to show up as a new process. You're not creating a new launch daemon, a new launch agent. It's very difficult to detect against this. And then again, imagine, just a great way to get into applications. If the browser, for example, or Zoom is able to access the firewall or has a rule to get through the firewall, you are running in that process context, you will also be able to get that access. So really surprised attackers don't make more use of this dilib proxying attack scenario because it's very stealthy and very powerful and affords you a lot of capabilities, a lot of access. Now, the good news is, I don't always just break things. I also write free security tools that can help protect against this. So the first one is oversight. Oversight will tell you anytime the mic or the webcam is activated, regardless of what permissions it has and if Apple has approved it. So this could potentially detect the attack scenario where the user, a malware took Zoom and is running it in the background with an injected dilib to access the mic and the webcam. Of course, it will show up as Zoom, but imagine you don't expect Zoom to be running and your mic is on via this attack, you will be alerted. Another tool I write is knock knock. This enumerates for persistence, and last few years it's also had the ability to detect these proxy dilibs. So if an attacker is using this proxy dilib attack to thwart Zoom or any other application to either stealthily gain persistence or install a backdoor and implant, knock knock can generically find these proxy dilibs. And so here, for example, after I installed my proxy dilib to subvert Zoom, ran knock knock, we can see it detects that there's this proxy dilib that's unsigned, unknown by VirusTotal. And obviously, if you were a forensics investigator at this point or malware analyst, you should take a closer look at that dilib to make sure or figure out exactly what it is. So that is a wrap. I believe we have a few minutes for some questions. So if there's any questions, we can chat about any of this.
Yeah, definitely. Well, one of the question was like, we can obviously tell that Patrick pre-recorded this presentation. So if you have any question, we have the proof it's live,
Yeah, no, it's live, 100%. No, I've just dosed so many of these that it works. No, and the VM is not a recording. That was live. Like I said, I really wanted to demo the injection attack, but I realized right before starting this, I was like, oh wait, I'm going to be using Zoom. So if I restart this, it's going to be problematic. So no,
if you make it crash, that could be quite funny though.
I would be amused, but I think all the users would be like, and there goes Patrick.
No, that's fine. Before we get any question in the chat, how long did it take again for Zoom to fix those vulnerabilities? I remember they were pretty quick, no?
Yeah, and that's actually something I wanted to focus. So thanks for bringing that up, because Zoom did an amazing job patching these bugs. So I posted the details of these bugs on the blog. I hadn't disclosed them to Zoom. My justification or my reasoning was that these were local vulnerabilities issues, so an attacker would obviously have to have already have some access to the system. Also, I really just wanted to bring broader awareness to Zoom's lack of privacy and security. And I think myself and other security researchers that were pointing out these flaws did a really good job driving that home. And to Zoom's credit, they fixed both of these bugs and a myriad of other bugs reported by other security researchers in one day. I mean, that's incredible. Like, for a vendor's point of view, that's amazing. Not only that, they very proactively really took a step back and said, hey, we now fully understand we have privacy and a security problem. Like, we understand, unfortunately, we didn't prioritize that from the beginning. You can't blame them too much, right? Silicon Valley startups, the goal is to basically gain the most possible number of users so that you become very important and widespread, and then, be acquired or IPO and make billions of dollars. And so the problem with that approach is, that's the best way to make a lot of money, but it really puts security and privacy on the back seat. Because, imagine a company spends 3 months on a new version of a product and says, hey, there's no new features, nothing's changed, but this version is more secure. Like, customers and users just are not going to care. So, Zoom and all these other companies prioritize new features. Hey, look, we have new animojis, and users are like, oh my God, I want that. And they will upgrade or pay for those new features. These companies make more money, get more users. And meanwhile, security and privacy really kind of is just an afterthought or no thought at all. Zoom, though, really kind of took a step back at this point and said, hey, we really need to focus on security and privacy. And so what they promised to do is a feature freeze, put all engineering resources on security and privacy issues. Amazing. Bring in third-party security researchers, do pen tests, improve their bug bounty program, have an external CISO board reviewing a lot of their decisions. So, moving forward, I'm very optimistic that Zoom will get their act together. And I think they're doing this not just because it's best for their users, but it's also what's best for them, right? They're
definitely
potentially losing customers because privacy and security is important to a lot of companies. So the good thing is by them now making security and privacy a priority, that's really a win-win, right? End users around the world will have a more secure product, and Zoom will get more companies and clients. So kudos to Zoom for really taking this seriously, and moving forward, I'm very optimistic that they will really kind of get their act together in terms of security and privacy.
Yeah, it's true. The response so far has been pretty good, because I think it was your blog post, the other one about the UNC path. I think the article from The Intercept also, like which was based from the Citizen Lab blog post, I think, about the encryption. I think they're getting a lot of hit at the moment, so they definitely need to show that they are investing internally on security.
Yeah, and like I said, I think they are. The CEO reached out to me personally, thanking me for my finding. Actually have a Zoom meeting with him later today. And so as a security researcher, like, that really floored me, because first and foremost, when you report bugs or post bugs on your blogs, vendors usually, either ignore you or, threaten legal action, or, the CEO never, let's just say Apple has never responded as positively as Zoom does. So, so that was eye-opening. And like I said, so I think I'm moving forward. I'm very optimistic that
that's
Zoom
pretty awesome. Yeah,
definitely improve their security and privacy posture. So again, really, it shows a lot of emotional maturity from Zoom's point of view. So just kudos again to them.
Yeah, definitely. Some more questions from the chat. Do you think Zoom hired former Slayer creators? I'm not sure what's Slayer. If so, is it a modern way to make your career path in cybersec?
So Slayer is a popular piece of adware, malware, and the way it elevates its privileges is by showing an authentication prompt. So I doubt it. The unfortunate reality is that API is just very commonly used because one, it was kind of the recommended approach by Apple. And unfortunately, the more modern APIs that Apple provides to securely perform privileged or elevated actions are incredibly complicated. You have to set up an XPC service, and you have to it installs a launch daemon that then you have to manually uninstall. You can't pass command line arguments. Like, it's totally doable and it is secure.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a ton of work and very difficult. So this everyone generally defaults back to this execute with privileges API because it's just so much simpler to use. So that's malware authors and also developers. So I don't think Zoom hired the malware authors. I mean, I don't know. I don't know who the malware authors are. But we see a lot of legitimate companies. I mean, Chrome for a long time utilized this API too, and they still might. They said it was they basically said it's a won't fix when I reported it because they said the alternatives are not valid. Sparkle, the very popular update platform that a lot of applications are compiled with, I believe still does as well. So unfortunately, it's very widespread.
Awesome. Another question: is it possible to detect Apple's use of MRT client side or over the network?
Yeah. So MRT is Apple's malware removal tool. It's interesting to monitor for a variety of reasons. First, Apple a lot of times detects new malware and doesn't tell anyone about it. You don't really share this with the antivirus community or security researchers, which I personally think is a really poor approach. I mean, sharing is caring, kind of all in this together.
Yeah.
So one way to
not
get
really
information about, not at all. That's a separate topic though. Stay focused, Patrick. So MRT is great to monitor because a lot of times you can gain insight into the signatures in the malware that Apple knows about by monitoring that. Also, in the case of Zoom, the fact that they use this technology to basically remove legitimate third-party code is super interesting.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, the easiest way to monitor MRT for updates is basically to monitor the binary itself, because actually Apple compiles a signature into the MRT binary. And so if the binary changes, there's a new version change, it's a good idea to basically pop it in a disassembler and start looking through that. So, you can set a watch path on that or have a file monitor running, basically looking for updates. The other thing I think you can do is you can ping Apple's update catalog, and they have the latest version. And so just make a web request, and if that version changes, you know that there's been an update. Now, in terms of monitoring its activity on the system, that's difficult because there's not like an MRT log file. It doesn't say, hey, I just removed Zoom. I believe there's some diagnostic logs you can dig around and find, but Apple barely likes to admit the existence of MRT because it acknowledges that there's malware running on the system. And if they use it to do things like remove Zoom, that's not something they want to talk about either. Yeah. So this is why generally it's difficult to monitor both for updates and to monitor its activities. But yeah, it would be great if Apple provided a little more transparency here, because you can imagine a Maxis admin wanting to know, hey, are there any systems on my network that MRT detected the remove malware for? I think that's a very valid question, but unfortunately, I don't see Apple changing their course on that. But I'll keep bugging them about it.
Yeah. But I still never got my, like the signing certificate for my driver, but so I pretty much gave up to do anything with Apple.
I know. Yeah. I mean, memory forensics, very, very important. Yeah. But they're just like, no.
But it's dead now. Like they killed all the kernel extensions anyway. So.
Yeah, they did. And we see attackers using in-memory only attacks and exploits, and this third-party security tools. Like, there's literally no way to detect that. And to me, that's mind-blowing that, techniques that attackers are publicly utilizing, that Apple has basically taken away the capabilities of security tools to detect and thwart that. Mind-blowing. But, Apple knows best.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for joining us, Patrick. It was really awesome to have you here. Tonight, I guess this morning for you, like it's still like early morning in a way. But yeah, thanks, awesome. Also, it's great to have you speaking at OPCOD again, because unlike Ryan, would decline some of the invitation before, or build on some invitation. You actually spoke at OPCOD in Dubai. It's great to have you back.
And I got to ride camels. I was really excited about that.
I remember I saw your pictures. It was pretty cool. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I just want to say thanks again for organizing this, both in the past, amazing conference. Any of you listening, OpCode's an amazing conference both to attend and speak at. Dubai, great place to visit. And Matt, I know how much work goes on organizing a conference, making sure everyone shows up when they say they will. So thank you too for organizing this and making it available online, because I think as researchers, the bugs we find, I think that's interesting, but us being able to disseminate that information to a broader audience, I think really moves the security of platforms and products forward. So yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks to you. The format is going to be like every 2 weeks anyway. Like the next edition is going to be 22nd of April. So yeah.
Can I come back?
if you want to, yeah. If you have anything to talk about, like Costin is actually coming back. He's probably going to do a fire chat with Dave Vettel actually. Like we'll see. Like it's still a discussion, but it's just happening in the chat, So yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thanks again. And everyone who's watching, mahalo, really appreciate it. And hopefully when this is all over, we'll all grab beers and reconnect in person, IRL.
Awesome. Take care. Bye.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Bye.